Anyway, so there it is. That is the Don't Say Gay bill.
Yes.
Do you recall the word gay ever coming up?
Not even homosexual.
Or trans or no, I don't remember any of that stuff coming up because it wasn't there. So the next time you hear somebody talk about Don't Say Gay bill, tell them the name of the bill. It's the Parental Rights in Education bill, because that's what we're talking about here. So
So all of sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. All the things you've seen, because I saw so many of our friends, people that we know, people are going to die. This stops people from even talking about being gay. LG grammar here. This stops teachers from discussing any type of LGBTQ plus IA issues.
Yeah. No, does not.
The only thing that's discussed in here is instruction in curriculum. Instruction is curriculum. That has to do with what is assigned to the students. That is what you're writing out as a as a lesson plan. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, lesson plan.
So, in the interview with Joe Harding, who is the person who wrote this bill,
Yeah.
right? He wrote the bill. He said the Board of Education will craft the curriculum and decide what they have. He said that I want students to bring things up organically. This doesn't stop teachers from answering questions. They can answer whatever questions they want.
Yep.
Anything that the student asks, that's not instruction. Instruction is curriculum. That is what you have planned to teach. Mm-hmm. You don't have to say, oh, I can't answer that. I can't say anything about that. There's nothing in here that says that. LZ Granderson, the trans activist who was interviewed, right, said,
I'm really curious before you say the line. I have like 3 guesses as to what that line might be, because there was a few of them that I think he was going to bring up, because you're about to bring up an example
right,
of that he made.
Says this stops teachers from discussing it directly or indirectly. Oh yeah. This says this isn't about harassment. This is about saying the Secretary of Transportation has a husband.
Damn it! I was gonna go with the Santa Claus, the
Oh,
Mr.
the
and
Santa
Mrs.
Claus
Claus.
is good. Yeah,
that
he
was.
said-
Then
he
he said,
said-
all of a sudden you're talking about sexual identity at
Yep.
that point, because you said Mr. and Mrs. Claus.
He says I think most people recognize that even
Yep.
if you say Mr. and Mrs. Claus, you're discussing sexual orientation.
Yeah, Pete Buttigieg was like my number 2 choice in that one.
Yep, he says LZ Granderson, right, and isn't called on it. There's no correction. There's no anything. He's allowed to say this and perpetrate the propaganda.
Yep.
And is not called on it, right? He says you can't even reference that Pete Buttigieg has a husband, or else the other example that he gave, the ridiculous example, is if a student says, I have 2 dads, another student hears it and goes home and says, Sally, as an example, has 2 dads. And the parent says, well, how did you know about that? How did you hear about that? What did the teacher say? And then all of a sudden, they're placing a call to the school district and everything is going on.
Yep.
That's not real. That's a fabricated scenario. Not only is it extremely hypothetical, it's fabricated. That's not real. It wouldn't work. It is not covered under this bill. That's a lie. That is propaganda to spin you against parents having the right to decline services and know what is happening in their K through 3rd grade students' lives. We're talking about fucking 8-year-olds.
Yes.
When you're in the 3rd grade, you are 8 and 9 years old. What are we talking about?
In the 3rd grade, 8, 9 years old?
8 and 9.
Okay.
8 and 9.
I'm still real bad.
When you
with the
start
age
kindergarten,
thing.
5 and 6. First grade, 6 and 7.
Okay.
2nd grade, 7 and 8. 3rd grade, 8 and 9.
Okay, it's real young in my mind, isn't it?
What are we talking about?
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
And I don't even want to say real young, because that's an old, tired avenue of argument. These kids aren't old enough to hear this stuff. I don't like that as an argument, because there's no objective reality to what that age is. If this was South Park, you could say 17, like Chef says. At 17, you're ready. That's when it all happens. In reality, it's up to the parent to decide when their child should learn these things. And it's going to be different for every single human being that goes to that school, because every set of parents or single parent is going to have different opinions on when they should do those things, or they're going to have different approaches to how they do those things, or whatever. It is not in the realm of responsibility for the government to pursue this end of education. I hate to say it, but parents as a whole, sexual and gender identification education is not something the government has any business being involved in.
No.
And I question your abilities as a parent to rely on the government to teach your child these incredibly important and incredibly delicate situations. Why would you trust anybody with that other than yourself? I don't know. You can have the utmost faith in the government and the government education system and all this stuff. This is a very personal and individualistic approach that's required for something like this. And to think that a school board could develop a curriculum in which this could be taught on a universal level requires the ideological framework of Marxist theory, which is problematic.
Yes. Elsie Granderson. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and that's something I don't. At that point, we've entered into the realm of ideology, and by de facto should not be a part of the education curriculum discussion whatsoever.
No.
If it enters the realm of ideology, it does not belong in a school board meeting. Period.
Again, I'm also not. Children are children. They should be able to ask. These are things we're going to bring up in this next part. So, children should be able to ask whatever they want. I am not saying that a teacher should answer any question that is appropriate for a child at that age. And if you, as a teacher, are not able to, I think I said parent, but teachers should be open to answer any question from a student that is appropriate for that age. And as a teacher, if you're unable to discern what is appropriate for a third grader, then I don't want you teaching my fucking kid. I want you out of the school, right? If a child asks and you think this is fine for me to answer, then I find it okay for you to answer. And if you as a reasonable adult think your parent should answer this, you should say your parent should answer that, right? The same thing happened when we were in school when it was about religion, right?
Yeah.
Our teachers would say, well, I can tell you what the school says, and I can tell you what my view is.
Yeah.
And that's what they would do, which even is questionable then when they're expressing their point of view. Because I was never in a position where I felt like a teacher was telling me this is what you should think, because it was always presented that the school tells me that this is the policy, that all religions are whatever, everyone can identify as whatever they want.
Yeah.
I personally am a Catholic, or I personally am a fucking Jew, or whatever, right? They're not like...
You had to add fucking in front of Jew, didn't you?
I know.
Thanks.
So, and I find that to be relatively appropriate in school. I don't think a third grader would ask a question like that. And if they do, I don't find it necessarily inappropriate to answer with your religious affiliation.
Yeah.
Just like if you're a fucking trans teacher and if a student asks you about it, I don't find it necessarily inappropriate to say, listen, I'm a trans person. I don't want to get too far into it because your parents should really talk to you about it, but I identify as this. Whatever you feel comfortable saying that, again, you think is appropriate, I don't find a problem with that. If you're gay and you say, I have a husband, this is my life, I'm gay, I have a husband, I don't really want to get too far into it because your parents should talk to you about it, I don't personally have a problem with that because that's who you are. That's
okay. But your line to what is appropriate and what is not appropriate is different than what some people's is.
100%.
That's
100%.
And that's the problem. Yes.
100%.
Everything you just said, I think is good and would
That's
actually
me.
make more children more accepting of various sexual and gender identifications than, some kind of hardcore proselytation or the opposite of that. Just the fact that a teacher, like if a child was to ask, teacher, you're different than my mom and dad. Why is that? What is that? What's going on? And they just said plainly, like there is no issue because there is no issue.
Right.
I live this, this is how I live. Boom, boom, boom. Factual, objective. This is where we're at.
Right.
And then your kid's going to be like, oh, that's interesting. And then they may come home and tell me about it. And then I'm going to be like, my red flags to go up. But what did your teacher say? Oh, nothing. He just told me that he lives blah, 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 blah. And then I'm like, oh,
Right.
okay. So do you understand what that is? Like, no, but that's interesting. Or yes. And then me and him or her will have a conversation or whatever it is. But yes, that level of objective information being exchanged at that level, I would have no problem with. And I think it would encourage more and more younger people to be more accepting of different things. Because if they're not being subject to propaganda at that level, or in James Lindsay's mind, groomed to that level, depending on what you're talking about, if you're speaking objectively about what it is that you're doing, the odds are you're a fucking school teacher, man. You probably live a pretty decent lifestyle. I'm probably not going to have problems with you. You teach at my school. You live in my community.
Right.
I'm not going to have a problem with you living whatever lifestyle you have.
Well,
and I would be very comfortable with somebody that lives a different lifestyle than my own, where my child has questions about, if you objectively tell them about the things that you do to an appropriate level.
Right.
I mean, let's just take sex out of it. Don't talk about having sexual relations with children.
It's inappropriate.
Period. Other than that, I feel like that's
regardless of the age. You shouldn't be talking
Yes.
to a senior in high school about the
No.
sex you have with your partner either.
No.
And no age
Regardless
is that
of the
an
age.
appropriate conversation to have with any student.
Yes, that is a
Right.
government employees should not be talking about that to my children at all. No human being should be talking about that children at all.
And you can answer a question about the way that you identify without going into trans ideology.
Yes.
You don't have to start talking about the spectrum of gender and all of this shit to say, I personally identify, even if you identify as gender fluid, even if that is
Yes.
how you identify, you don't have to go into the ideology of it. That in itself, I find appropriate. And I agree with you. That's my view. And that's why
And probably educational, by the way, on a personal
that's why
level.
someone of my mindset and parents of my mindset should be at board meetings discussing these things, making this policy, informing the policy that their children are going to be educated under. You know what I'm saying?
Welcome to the salt of the streets, coming at you every week with this food for thought. Hope you ready to eat every